My grandfather, Dan McGrew, joined the Merchant Marines on October 4th, 1943 at the age of 17. On March 1st, 1946, the vessel broke in half off of Attic, Alaska. It broke at the number 5 tank, the exact craft we had in Australia in 1943. My grandfather was stuck for 5 days on a ship,
Just waiting.
hoping and praying that someone would show up. Luckily, nobody died from this thing cracking in half. I really grew as a person being a litigator. I got very, very comfortable and good at doing cross-examinations and depositions. The first year is definitely the hardest because you haven't studied the law yet and you're just being thrown into this, and it's different than you think it's going to be. It's always fun to go into a deposition and have a gotcha moment. I had experiences where I've been deposing a doctor, and then we finished the deposition and the claims counsel called me and said, okay, let's settle now. I don't want to go through anymore. If you have policies in place, gotta call them. I think that's one of the biggest things that they're going after right now when they're going for those nuclear verdicts is their safety culture is just an illusion. You know,
Yeah.
that's what they want to say. When we want to show, no, that's not true. We take it seriously. This is what we do.
It's a reality. It's enforced. It's embedded in our culture. And unfortunately, this event happened. We're going to try to do right by it. But all the research that you're going to see shows that this is truly a safe culture.
Marlis McGrew, I appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No problem. Just brief overview. I'd like to, get into your personal and professional bio first, summary of it, because it's pretty extensive. And then from there, we'll kind of go through your career and try to keep it in chronological form. But first, I'd like to warm up just with some kind of rapid fire questions, like a brain warm up.
Okay.
You good with that?
I'm good with that.
All right. This is the fun part. Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Night owl.
Do you prefer to be hot or cold?
Hot.
This room's pretty cold.
Yeah. No, my hands will probably be numb by the end of it.
We'll do some push-ups. How do you
There
think?
we go.
What's your favorite comfort food?
Oh my gosh. I like all foods. I think I always go back to eating tacos though.
Okay.
Taco person.
Fair enough. My wife loves Mexican food.
Potatoes, like eating mashed potatoes.
You and Chrissy would
Yeah.
enjoy eating comfort food together. What's your favorite legal TV show or movie?
Oh my goodness.
Or least favorites that don't have a beta?
I don't think I have a really favorite legal TV show or movie.
You're not a Suits fan?
No. No. Not a Suits fan.
Law and Order?
Law, no. They're so inaccurate that it gets distracting to watch them. So,
Good TV though. I watched it with my aunt growing up.
if I'm watching TV, I'm watching science fiction, or even with movies. That's
So you like to get away from the legal world
Yeah,
with your form of entertainment.
Yes, definitely.
I personally like Devil's Advocate.
That was a good one.
Really good one
Yeah.
to take that like
But it was so
good
far,
versus bad.
But it was so far out there that it was,
Yeah, the devil being like the partner and then trying to get his son into the firm and giving him all the wealth and everything that's exciting, but you kind of have to lose your humanity in the
It's
process.
always the classic, The Firm. That's
Yeah.
always a good one.
Firm, Pelican Brief, like
Yeah.
some old school stuff that's good.
Yeah.
All right. This one's big. Who's the better attorney, you or your husband?
All right. So I saw this question on the list and I brought it out to my children, and they wanted to be able to do little videos so that they could jump in between, you cut in so that they can have a vote.
Okay.
So, but really he and I are two entirely different type of attorneys. But we have complementary skills. So he he's the guy who wants to go in the courtroom and do the arguments, be in front of the judge and the jury. And I hated that stuff. I mean, I would do it, but it would not be the day that I would be happy about my job. I was more of the writer, the analytical person, trying to solve a problem, come up with an argument. And that's kind of was my wheelhouse, whereas he's more, he wants to get in front of people and argue.
Fair to say you're both very good at different things.
We're both very good at different things. I mean, I'm still good at arguing. You should always come to our house and sit and listen to our conversations. People are like, you guys actually get along? It sounds like you guys are arguing.
And you're like, yeah, this is what love looks like.
This is our love. This is how we act together. This is how we get through problems.
Okay.
All
right, last one, and then we'll get into your background. True or false? Is the U.S. Constitution currently the longest standing constitution of any government in the world?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Oh, yeah.
They think because we're a young country that our constitution is young, but in reality, it's widely considered the longest lasting written constitution of any country in the world.
Correct. And many countries use it as a model for their own.
That's right. Okay, cool. So to get into your background, first of all, it's April 10th, 2025. So Marlos McGrew, you were born in Washington, born into a family with deep petroleum roots. Your grandfather on your mother's side, he was a civil engineer, actually even worked on the Texaco refinery in Anacortes during the refinery boom.
He actually designed it. He helped design it. He was very famous for it, actually. Back in high school, we actually took a field trip of all things to the refinery. Like, no one would do that nowadays, right?
They should.
They should, but I highly doubt they would. But I remember being on the bus and workers on the front coming on the bus saying, I heard that Dick Kirkpatrick's granddaughter's on this bus. Like, he's famous and he would talk to me, and it was amazing. Like, he worked at that facility from 1957 when it opened for 30 plus years. And that's what he did. He designed it. At the end, he retired as the chief engineer. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So he came out of Montana. That's where he got a civil engineering degree, and then moved to Anacortes during the big boom in the Northwest where all the refineries were going up. I think Shell beat them to it. Their refinery in Anacortes opened first. But Texaco shortly thereafter, which is now, I believe, the Tesoro refinery out there.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But equally impressive, your other grandfather on your dad's side joined the Merchant Marines at 17, and he eventually ended up delivering fuel to troops in World War II via a tanker ship.
Correct. He was actually in the Asian part of the warfare. So he would be sailing between like Australia, Japan,
so Pacific campaign.
The Pacific campaign. Okay. It was primary jet fuel that they were delivering, and he had quite the interesting time there. I actually brought an article from the Bellingham Herald.
Sure.
So I can tell you a story from his time there.
Love it.
Okay, so my grandfather, Dan McGrew, this article was actually published twice in the Bellingham Herald in honors of Veterans Day. It's entitled Sailor Saw Sinking of the SS Sackett's Harbor by Dan McGrew. It goes, I joined the Merchant Marines on October 4th, 1943 at the age of 17. I had my 18th birthday in Sydney, Australia, while aboard the tanker SS Sackett's Harbor. We sailed from San Pedro, California, bound for Brisbane. A submarine began pursuing us as we approached the east coast of Australia. We increased speed and passed through the South Passage between Moreton Island and Russell Island. We were unable to make the turn to approach the Brisbane River, and we ran aground in Moreton Bay, but the sub didn't follow. The tanker's hull cracks, deck line to deck line through tank number 5, losing its load of aviation fuel. We freed the ship on high tide, proceeded upriver to Brisbane, discharged our cargo, and went south to Newcastle for repairs. The shipyard welded the crack, and we sailed to Sydney and then to Iran, where we loaded cargo and returned to Sydney. He then left the Sackett Harbor for a period of time, and then returned. The war ended while I was aboard the Sackett's Harbor. On March 1st, 1946, the vessel broke in half off of Attic, Alaska. It broke at the number 5 tank, the exact crack we had in Australia in 1943. The forward half with 10 men aboard drifted away from the stern section. The radio was on the forward half, and the men there managed to get it working and called for help. The frigate USS Orlando went to their assistance. The portion he was on was found 5 days later by a British cargo ship, and the Orlando brought the crew from the bow to us. The Orlando returned to the bow and found that it was actually capsized, with only the point of the bow above water. They sank the bow with cannon fire. They then sailed to Attic, where the crew were removed and sent home. 4 of us remained aboard until July, when the section was towed to Anchorage, where it provided the electricity to the city for many years. It was actually the main power source for Anchorage, Alaska, for almost a full decade before they had a hydropower. So it provided, I think, 57% of the power during that period of time to the city.
Reliable energy source.
And then another really interesting fact is eventually, when they stopped using that as a power source, someone came in and fixed it. And then they put in stainless steel tanks, and it actually became a cargo ship for wine.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So that ship has quite the little history.
I was about to say, that's an incredible history.
Yeah. My grandfather was stuck for 5 days on just half a ship, had to take a ship,
Just wait.
hoping and waiting that someone would show up. Luckily, there was nobody died from this thing cracking in half. Sent you pictures so you can see what it looked like. It was quite amazing. But 2 cats did pass. They were
Felines.
2 felines. Yes, the 2 cats passed away. They were in the portion that sank, and the sailors had put them inside cupboards because they were afraid that they were going to jump out
Yeah.
and drown or something. So in their attempts to save them, they
Trapped them.
they trapped them and they perished, unfortunately. But all the men were safe, and so that was kind of one of his many stories of his experience on the tankers there. He later, after the war, he stayed with the Merchant Marines for 30 years or so. And then he joined a shipping company. I can't remember exactly what the name is, but by the time he finished his career, he was the chief engineer of a 100,000-ton super tanker. So
he was legit.
He was legit. And then he retired and moved to Bellingham, moved in just a few blocks away from me. And he was there all my life growing up and telling us all of his stories. So
Fair to say he might have planted some early seeds?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, 100%. I mean, every Christmas was spent with my grandparents there. And I'd walk home from school, always stop there for some cookies or something. So it was great growing up having that influence in my life. So
Sounds like a good papa.
yeah, he was.
Equally impressive, your father, also petroleum roots, he was a mechanical engineer, and you guys lived in Alaska for a period of time while he was working on a pipeline?
Yeah, well, for a short period of time, we were actually, so he joined Anvil Engineering, I want to say 1983 or 1984. Prior to that, he actually worked at the Pacific Science Center, if you remember.
Yeah.
If you've ever been there. It's got a big fountain. He was kind of in facilities management. So he would work there at night while getting his engineering degree at the University of Washington. He took so many classes. At one point, the dean actually came to him and said, "You need to graduate or decide to go for your master's degree. There's no classes left for you to take." So they kind of booted him. So then he went from there, and then he actually worked at the Texaco refinery for a little while.
Okay.
Before joining Anvil in Bellingham. And then they shipped him off to Anchorage to open up their offices there. He was a one-man office when they were out there working on the North Shore slopes, the oil fields out there. He worked on all the refineries, on the pipeline, and eventually he built that office up. So there was 40 people working at every refinery that was connected to Anvil. He made that office. He also later opened an office in Canada, which they later shut down just because getting back and forth between Washington and Canada became too difficult, the border.
Logistically. Yeah.
You used to be back in the day, all you have to do is drive up, show your driver's license, and you could get through, make sure you declare anything if you're bringing anything over, but everything got tightened up. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you're getting petroleum from all sides, dad, both grandfathers, and then...
And my great-grandfather as well. So on the Kirkpatrick side, that's my mother's side, he also was he was a pipe fitter for refineries and worked at the oil fields in Montana. Or was it? No, it's the one who worked in Oklahoma. So
Awesome.
so is the other side. There's so many people in my family who were like, everybody works in the oil fields.
All right.
And if they weren't doing that, they were on a fishing trip up through Alaska getting salmon and crab and all that good stuff. So
Beautiful parts of the country.
Yes.
So now flash forward, you end up in Idaho studying psychology for your undergrad.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then after that, you end up in San Diego. You go to law school, graduate from there, University of San Diego, great law school. And then after law school, you perform at a very high level as a business and commercial litigation attorney for nearly 2 decades before you joined the oil industry, like your forebears before you, originally as general counsel, but currently serving as the chief legal officer at ROC.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. And most importantly, I'll end with this. You're a wonderful mother of 2. And interestingly enough, you're married to another attorney.
Interestingly enough. And it's lasted for several years. Who would have thought?
Like I said, I just get my popcorn and come over for dinner and enjoy.
You can watch. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about growing up and this family with deep petroleum roots and how you end up in Idaho studying psychology.
Well, for one, I think I ended up in Idaho because I wanted to go to an out-of-state school, but not too far out of state. So technically, Moscow, Idaho was only like 8 miles out of state. There's a little highway at the time that connected Washington State University, Pullman, Washington, and then there was University of Idaho. I just wanted to go to some place where I wasn't seeing the same faces because a lot of people from my high schools, they were either going to UW, Washington State University.
Something different.
I wanted,
And Idaho's beautiful.
and it's beautiful. And then once I got in-state residency, the tuition was much cheaper as well. So, work the system. All that
Awesome.
Stuff. Yeah.
Oh, growing up in Washington with your dad in the oil industry, is it something that he pushed on you, or is it something that you just kind of were organically exposed to and you charted your own path?
I mean, being in that area, when you're growing up, you're constantly exposed to it. There are several disasters that happened over time. There was 2 explosions. One in 1998 that happened at the Texaco. I think at the time it was still Texaco, maybe not. And then again in 2010, I think one of them killed 5 people. 2010 killed like 7 people. There's always spills. There's always something going on with the refineries where we're hearing about it, or my dad going to fix a leak, or there's spills somewhere that he's helping to respond to. So I was always very aware of the dangers of the industry and the efforts that people went through to try to make sure that people were safe doing this industry. And then you have my grandfather and his tanker cracking in half. Like there's all sorts of hidden dangers that people don't even know about. Bellingham in 1998 is also the site where the Olympic pipeline exploded. That killed one 18-year-old boy and 2 10-year-old boys. It was very, very tragic, and it was one of the most beautiful parks and like swimming areas. You could go to the creek, you could jump over the waterfalls and into the water, and it just entirely changed the the nature out there. They actually kind of rebuilt some of the rocks with cement to kind of recreate what it looked like before. It was a huge fireball, and those 2 boys, if they hadn't been there doing what they were doing, they were playing with fireworks. The leak would have gone on for longer, and the explosion would have been bigger, and the disaster would have been.
So that was the ignition source, was the fireworks?
Yes, it was the fireworks. So, a lot of the locals kind of thought of them as little heroes. So, and then the other victim was an 18-year-old boy who was just fishing down on the creek, and he passed from inhalation. He didn't die in the actual explosion itself.
Yeah, I think, you'll definitely hear the horror stories on the news. I mean, it's a dangerous industry. That's dangerous work. Definitely necessary for a modern way of life. But, hopefully with every catastrophe that happens, you do a postmortem, you look at what went wrong, what could improve, and hopefully you're continuously improving, not only, I would say, individually at a company level, but for the industry as well. Because nobody wants that.
No one wants that. And, growing up, I was the math whiz of the family. I was on the math team. My father really thought that if any of his children, if someone was going to follow in his footsteps and be an engineer, it would have been me. But I don't know. I was just got bored of number crunching. And so when I went to college, psychology, I was like try to figure out how people's minds work. It was also, had a minor in crime and justice studies. And you just get the end of that and you're like, oh, what am I actually going to do with this degree? You know, I have a bachelor's of science in psychology. What to do with that? I was like, well, let's try law school, see what we can do there. And then originally I was thinking going into criminal law, but I landed a different job before my application to the government was considered. They were a little slow. They called me a couple weeks later. I'm like, sorry, I've already taken another job, got law school loans to pay back. And so went into litigation. I thought at the time that was the last thing that I would ever really want to do was to be a litigator. That I had this huge fear of public speaking. It's not my jam. I really grew as a person being a litigator. I got very, very comfortable and good at doing cross-examinations and depositions. And I did a lot of work where it was experts. So I was deposing mechanical engineers. I was deposing civil engineers, statisticians, and all that stuff. And coming in with knowledge base kind of surprises them. They always think that the attorneys are going to ask them stupid questions. And I didn't ask very stupid questions. I don't.
Okay.
I'm very deliberate. So, yeah.
I personally feel like coal miners are some of the hardest working people in some of the most dangerous environments in the United States. And I'll say this, United States mining is far safer than any mining outside of the United States. And we have minerals here. We should be accessing those minerals here. And coal is a great source of energy.
And those coal miners are like a brotherhood. I mean, they live and die for each other. They would, really.
You can have all the science and data and technology and equipment in the world, and it's an unforgiving environment if the smallest thing goes wrong. So I give a lot of credit to the coal miners. I think people should appreciate and respect what they do. Can you talk about the Crandall Canyon disaster from you and your brother's standpoint?
It's crazy what those families went through. About in August of 2007 is when that accident happened, and 6 miners ultimately lost their lives. And then about a few days after that, they had another event and 3 actually rescuers that was trying to rescue the 6 miners that were trapped at the time. They didn't know. And I'll never forget how good the people were at Haycock, because we had people willing to give up their vacation time for my brother to take off, because he burned up all of his vacation and stuff. Here he was almost the end of his career, and then this happened to him. Unfortunate for all the miners, obviously, but it was a bad deal.
Backtrack real quick. For those people that didn't go to law school, what did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Is it continuously more difficult, or is the first year a bit of a smack in the face with the reality of how much work it is? Or what was your impression of law school?
I mean, I think it depends on the law school you go to.
Well, you went to a pretty good one.
I went to a pretty good law school, but the environment, everybody in San Diego was pretty chill. Yeah. So, you had your few, what we called them gunners in law school. They're the guys who are always raising their hand first. They want to be recognized as on top. But I was very lucky where most of my classmates were very chill people. They didn't make it super competitive. The way that some law schools tend to be. I've talked to other attorneys who did not have the experience I had, but it is a lot of work. The first year is definitely the hardest because you haven't studied the law yet, and you're just being thrown into this, and it's different than you think it's going to be. But then you get into doing practical stuff. I was in the environmental law clinic where I represented some clients as a law clerk. And then also I worked for the alternate public defender in San Diego for a short period of time before I worked for a private conflict counsel. So she was her own solo attorney who took conflict matters, which means that there's multiple defendants in the case. They already have a public defender. They already got a alternate public defender. So this third defendant needs someone, that type of thing. It gets different as you go through law school. And I thought it gets easier because you start to get the experience.
Yeah.
And you start to get into the rhythm of things. The first year is definitely rough. For me, the roughest part was, the Hippocratic method where they just randomly call on you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just freeze.
Yeah. Do you start to narrow in on what type of law you think you're going to practice as you progressively go through law school?
Yes. First year, everything's very general. You got to take all of your torts, contract law, criminal law, procedural law, all that fun stuff. And then you can start selecting courses that are more interest to you.
Okay.
You have to take tax law too. That one wasn't as fun.
You didn't want to go get your LLM?
No.
I heard a joke actually by someone that we probably both know, Jim Broder. Shout out to Broder if you're out there. He's like, I'm a patent attorney. The only attorneys that are more boring than a patent attorney is a tax attorney.
Yeah.
I actually know a tax attorney who's actually a great guy. I went to college with him. He's probably the exception to the rule, but outside of him, I probably agree with Jim Broder. Yeah, those two types of attorneys are very dry.
Very dry.
Okay.
Very dry, for sure.
So you've mentioned that you wanted to get into criminal defense. You actually applied for a job with the government.
Yeah.
But typical government was a little bit too slow to respond, particularly as you're finishing law school and you've got law school debt and you want to get into the workforce. So you went a different route. What was that route?
Well, that route was my husband at the time he'd gone from a law clerk to an attorney in the same firm. So we were out for an intramural softball game. And after that, we went out to a bar and the main partner of the law firm that I ended up working for talked to me for a couple hours and then offered me a job at 1 a.m. It's like, oh.
There you go.
Yeah. So I had one little interview with the partner that I ended up working for. And then I started and I actually didn't go through the typical swearing in of an attorney. The day that I knew I passed the bar, I went into, I think it was a UPS, did my swearing in there, had the notary do it, and I went straight to a deposition my first day.
Day one deposition.
Day one deposition.
So must have had a lot of confidence in how you presented yourself at the bar at 1 a.m. if he throws you into a deposition day one.
Yeah, sink or swim. That's usually how, or at least back when I started, that's pretty much how it was. You're an attorney. It's very different than law school, and they just throw it at you and see if you can figure it out. Now there's a lot of mentorship programs. I think a lot of good things that they're doing to make sure young attorneys don't, drown. It's a very tough industry to be in. And it's competitive at the law firm level as well. Attorneys are always competing against each other to become partner or senior attorney and all that fun stuff. So yeah, it's very stressful. Firm life.
Yeah, I would say, having worked at a firm on the accounting side, putting energy into the people, whether it's, training or resources, would be beneficial to the firm as a whole. I mean, if you're investing in some human fresh out of law school, you would want them to be successful, because if they're successful, your firm is successful, but it doesn't always work out that way. And it is typically a hyper competitive environment, different than business in my experience, because you have a lot of people doing, the same job effectively, whether you're an associate or a partner, and everybody's trying to outshine everybody else, where in a normal business environment or, for a jobbership, kind of have different departments that work functionally together as a team sport. So you're not trying to outshine your counterpart.
Exactly. It's a different environment.
But it sounds like you did outshine your counterparts.
At times, yes.
At times, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Gotta be modest.
For people that aren't super familiar with what a deposition looks like, can you just generally explain what goes into a deposition, not only for the person being deposed, but for the one doing the deposition, the attorney?
Well, there's always two attorneys, because there's also an attorney there defending the deposition. So, depositions are great because you can ask questions that are not going to be admitted. It's just, they have to answer more stuff, and then you can kind of explore. But it's also can be a cross-examination. It's always fun to go into a deposition and have a gotcha moment. I've had experiences where I've been deposing a doctor, and then we finished the deposition, and the plaintiff's counsel called me and said, okay, let's settle now. I don't want to go through anymore. And that's always a good feeling when you nailed something. But I always tell people when they're preparing to be deposed themselves, short answers.
Yes, no, preferable.
So the yes, no is a yes, no question. Give them a yes or no. Sometimes I'll try to trick you with a yes, no question. And then you can go ahead and explain, but don't over explain, because then you're just kind of going off topic, and they might find something in what you're saying to use against you. Kind of follow the lead of your attorney.
So if you're elaborating, you're probably not listening to your attorney's advice, and the opposing attorney is probably headed towards the gotcha moment.
Correct.
Yeah.
You're doing exactly what they want you to do. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, for getting deposed, short and sweet.
Short and sweet is always best.
Yeah. And be polite.
That's right.
Always be polite. What else were you exposed to during
nearly 20-year tenure working in litigation and, business and commercial law. What were some of the favorite things that you enjoyed while you were doing that?
Well, as I said before, one of my strong suits I always felt was my writing. So I really enjoyed doing insurance coverage letters. People find that weird, but analyzing whether or not there's coverage for a specific occurrence was always interesting. The law there is vast and different across all the states, and I always loved trying to figure out the puzzle if we could deny, because that's what the insurance company always wants. Like, how can we get out of this? I also did insurance coverage litigation, which was always interesting when insurance companies are suing each other. So, that was always fun. That was one where I remember the brief I wrote, I didn't even have to argue anything. I just stood up there and the judge just quoted my brief to the other side and said, "What is your response to this point? This is response to this point." I'm like, this is my best day in court ever because I don't actually have to talk. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So
good day for me, bad day for you.
Yeah. So, but I handle so many different kinds of cases. One of the things I liked about my litigation career is it was just all over the place. I did medical malpractice. I did construction defect. I did personal injury, car crash cases, trucking cases, contract litigation. I feel like over the course of my career, I've had the chance to touch upon a little bit of everything that a lot of people didn't get the opportunity to do because, you get into a law firm and they kind of like put you in a lane and say, this is your specialty. This is what you're going to be doing. So all you're doing are construction cases or all you're doing is personal injury cases. And that would drive me crazy. I get bored really, really fast. I like to have a variety of things to do.
I'm glad you mentioned that because in my experience, limited experience just dealing with attorneys, I feel like there's a few different routes you can go, but two of the main ones that constantly come up are you're pigeonholed into your lane, right? Which for some people they might love it. For other people, it's, your worst nightmare. Or you're exposed to so much practicing law that you almost become like an expert in that thing for that moment in time while you're dealing with that case. And then you're like, wow, I have you get past the case, hopefully to a victorious judgment. And then you're like, I have all this useless knowledge that I'm never going to revisit that again. And you're moving on to becoming an expert in the next topic and the next challenge ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny how so many of the things that I've learned from these different types of cases have come up just working here. And you would think it would not apply to anything. Like I was talking to our HR director the other day. We were talking about a specific employee. And then I was like, oh, there's this one spot in the brain that you have to manipulate. And it's called the corpus callosum. And that's what they do with dogs. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I Googled it. I'm like, nope, I was right. That's exactly what the name of that brain structure is. So
corpus what?
Corpus callosum.
And they do it with dogs? Is it like Pavlov's dogs type of?
It's if you have a seizure disorder for dogs, they'll go in and then they will cut. It's the connection between the left and the right hemisphere. And so they'll sever that. And so that way the seizure doesn't spread from one side of the brain to the other. But it's just an example of me just pulling random facts that I'm like, I would never think that would come up in job here, but they do all the time. So it's kind of funny.
Well, that's probably a perfect segue. So you have this long career in law. You end up in the oil industry. What are some of the decisions or factors that went into making that decision?
Well, when I heard that there was a position at Rebel Oil, I just thought, wow, that fits perfectly into everything I've learned through how I've grown up. And, working for the oil industry, I came into this job thinking I could really help this company with the safety aspect and making sure that they're protected and not just protecting the company from liability and exposure, but making sure that the employees are making it home at night. Because I've seen the families that have been devastated from their family being involved in the petroleum industry and then having an accident and then they don't come home. I think that helping shape a safety culture and doing risk management and all of that stuff, that's kind of what I wanted to come in and help do. And so, yeah.
Well, let's elaborate on that. What would go into, general best practices? Obviously we're not advising other companies what to do, but some general best practices for risk management for a jobber, oil distributor in this industry. Like, where would you start? Basic fundamentals.
Basic fundamentals for what?
Risk management in the field. I would say DOT transportation. What are some of the things that you need to know if you're transporting hazardous materials? Whether it be fuel or oil, those are big trucks. There's a lot that can go wrong. What are some of the things that a company should be aware of if you're going to get into that business?
Well, I mean, you need to be aware of the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then you need to have a plan to react to them. So you want to have safety plans in place. You want to actually make sure you're following through those safety plans. You've got to make sure that you've got the right insurance in place. If you don't have the right insurance in place, then if you don't have the limits, they're going to go after you personally, and then your company's gone. So just also, when you have tools, you need to use them. If you have cameras in your trucks, don't just let them sit there recording footage and not doing anything about it. You got to make sure you have some sort of program in place where you're coaching your drivers about safety issues that as they arise, rather than reacting later. Oh, this guy's been using his cell phone for a month, and now there's an accident. Like, got a month worth of video footage there. That's not going to look good in court.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we were having meetings with our insurance company prior to you joining, and they basically said that this is the way. If you're transporting goods at some point here in the near future, insurance companies really don't want to insure you unless they know that you have, camera technology not only facing out of the cab, but facing into the cab. Because, if you have a claim or, you have, something catastrophic happen, they just want to know what happened. Oftentimes, the first story that you get continues to evolve as you kind of go through that process and that claim. But if you have video footage, not only what's happening in the truck, but what's happening outside the truck, I'd say more often than not, you protect yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
More often than not, you'll find that actually it wasn't our driver's fault. It was the other party's fault.
Yeah, it could be a duck and swoop or something weird happened that really wasn't the responsibility of the driver. But without that video,
you wouldn't know. And
it's just two stories.
Yes. And then you have, the poor injured party going up against the, black hat oil company, and nobody wants to have that in court. So it's always good
I want to avoid that.
Always good to have the evidence, but the big danger of having the cameras is not using them to their full capabilities. Because if you have that footage and you're just letting it roll and you're not responding to policy violations, you're just setting yourself up for punitive damages and losing your business.
Yeah, I would say if anybody's if they don't have cameras in their their vehicles and they're thinking about doing it, it's a great idea, but you have to have kind of like a progressive plan. Yeah, put the cameras in the trucks, get everything going, establish a baseline, and quickly move to improve that baseline. If you're seeing things that are against DOT law, I mean, you should act on those immediately. You don't wait months or years before you start to implement your improvement plan, because to your point, something can happen during that period of time. And now you have all this video footage that says like, hey, at any point in time, you could address these safety issues, and you did not. You just put cameras in the trucks. Putting cameras in the trucks is not a great idea unless you plan to use that data to improve the safety culture of your company.
Correct.
And we've done a great job. I know you were a big part of our safety committee, and taking just the bare bones, I would say general fundamentals of the Samsara technology and saying like, hey, how can we improve this? How can we get safer? And how can we reward the drivers for being not only safe for themselves, safe for our company, but safe for their community and getting home to their family safely at night. So I personally want to say thank you for being a big part of that, because it elevated our game.
Yeah, no, that was a program that kind of came to me while I was sleeping. I came up with a lot of ideas while I'm sleeping. Yeah. I just remember I had a meeting with Derek, our EHS guy, and we were talking about Samsara. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's just videos right now? What are we doing with that? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And I just went home and I slept that night, and I woke up in the morning. I was like, we're going to do this program. It's going to be great. And then sent the email out, and all of us started meeting, and it took a few
light bulb.
Put it together, the Rockstar program. And I think one of the reasons that was so successful, though, when we introduced it, was the way we introduced it and being able to have that video of Fitz. And yeah, because it was a prime example of why having cameras in there.
Well, now you got to tell the story. All right, so tell the story about Fitzy, our rock star.
Our rock star Fitz. Okay, so he was driving back from EDC, which is one of those festival rave things that's outdoors at the Speedway here in Las Vegas. And it was at the end of the festival, and he was on the on-ramp to get onto, I believe, the I-15 going south. And this man in a towel jumped out in front of him on the on-ramp and then proceeded, I believe, put cones in front of him to try to block him off.
Giant construction cone, towel, no shoes, and a caution tape like a Miss America sash.
Can't forget the caution tape sash that he had on. He's barefoot. He then proceeded to go and get into the passenger side. So, number one, we got a new SOP out of that, making sure your doors are always locked, right? So
The only thing Fitzy did wrong.
the only thing he did wrong the whole time, in fact, he had the patience of a saint. The man got into the car and started interacting with Fitz, getting up and down, acting very agitated, and Fitz is on the phone trying to call for help. And at one point, I think it was like 8 minutes in, the man gets up and turns towards him, and the towel falls off. All you see is this man's naked rear end. And that's finally what was too much for Fitz. And, gold glove swing right there. He took him out, and he fell out of the vehicle. And at that point, there was another truck driver who had stopped and supposedly caught this man. We didn't get that part of it.
Like, what's going on with these naked guys in this tractor?
Yeah. So, we were able to present that video when we introduced the Rockstar program. And when we introduced it in Las Vegas, we actually gave Fitz that gold glove
Boxing allowed, yeah.
That was awesome. And it was a really good way to show the guys, this could happen to you. And what could this guy say if there was no video? He could say, no, Fitz is the one. He sexually assaulted me, or he did whatever. And we would have no way of proving who is right and who is
his word against your word. Now we're like, nah, we got a 9-minute video.
Yeah.
And arguably he's a saint because it lasted 9 minutes before he finally ejected him from the truck. But yeah, it's an incredible video, and he was a good sport for letting us share that because it could happen to anybody, particularly if you don't lock the passenger door.
Yeah, it's a classic one. I still have it saved on my iPad so I could show it to people every once in a while. Look at this. This is why we have cameras. It's okay.
Yeah, it was a great introduction of the program, and it's progressively gotten better. And not only has it gotten better with our scoring system, but each year we tighten it a little bit more. Whether it's your speeding, harsh turns, whatever those 21 different factors are that we're measuring, we try to make it just incrementally harder for them to maintain those scores. And a big shout out to all of our drivers that do an amazing job.
Oh, they are doing an excellent job. When I see the scores, I get monthly automatic reports. Whenever I see their scores, I'm thrilled because from where we started before the program to where we are today, it is night and day. It's like looking at an entirely different company. Kudos to all the drivers for paying attention. And a lot of them are really interested in their metrics. They see their score drop just even a little bit. They're on it. And why do I have a 99 and not 100? And so then they get the coaching and it's great also for the managers to be able to interact with their drivers. And then they see things and they can use them as immediate examples of the next safety meeting of this is what went wrong here. And this is how we need to do it going forward. So now we're using the cameras as a tool for multiple things, not just for recording.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also say that we've used that when we're talking with our insurance companies to kind of demonstrate the safety culture. And, from your perspective, what does an average insurance stack look like for, a company our size or smaller? What are they typically looking at for umbrella, general auto liability, the other categories? And what are some scary trends that we're seeing in the insurance environment right now?
I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but right now there's actually legislation before the Nevada legislature to change the minimums for certain intra-trucking cargo. it used to be that Nevada required that you had a minimum limit of $750,000 for your auto liability. They're doubling that to $1.5 million
Just in Nevada.
just in Nevada, and that's why it has to.
Going on in session right now.
Yeah, going on in session right now. Don't know if it'll pass, but that's just showing you that everything's increasing. Your premiums are increasing. Your requirements of what your limits are increasing. It has to be interstate cargo only, because otherwise it crosses interstate commerce. They're going to be, going over the DOT's regulations and all that stuff. So you don't want federal law going against the local law. That's never a good thing. So it's very confusing if you actually read the proposed legislation of who it's going to apply to.
Yeah.
Because of the way they drafted it. Surprise.
Right. How's that say?
We'll
Not surprised.
see. We'll see what comes out of the actual committee. I believe it's in committee right now. But yeah, it's not good. But typically companies this size, they have that 1 million per occurrence, 2 million aggregate for all their policies. Whether that's sufficient or not, it really depends on your safety culture. So hopefully you never go above that. A lot of them have their umbrella is more like a $5 million. One trucking company that I cannot name that I did a couple of cases for, they just self-insured, and it was like they had 15 million set aside just in the bank account.
Just in case.
Just in case.
For a rainy day.
For a rainy day. So, it varies across the industry, but a company this size, that's what we have is pretty standard. And then deductibles vary what people are willing to put on the line. So
High deductible, low deductible.
yeah. But contractually, you're seeing more and more companies, especially when you're going into their terminals and all of that, upping the limits that they want to see.
Which is going to increase your insurance premium. And I would say particularly for smaller jobbers out there, it's tough because as insurance gets more expensive, you have two options. Do you pass that along to your customer base or do you eat it? And it basically comes out of your bottom line. But it's getting increasingly more expensive. And I think, one of the reasons it's getting increasingly expensive is, the wheels component of what we do. Can you talk a little bit about it, like what a nuclear verdict is and, how that weighs into insurance getting more and more expensive?
A nuclear verdict is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a company ending verdict. It's those verdicts where you're looking at, well, depending on the company, a $10 million verdict could take out one company, they won't take out another, but, $100 million verdicts are out there. Nevada particularly, it's very litigious. There's a lot of high jury verdicts out here, but, it is what it is. You work in the jurisdiction you're in, and you just be aware of those things. But yeah, Nevada is special.
Volume is vanity, right?
Yeah.
Profit is sanity. And
Correct.
when you hear these things and they make sense to you and they resonate with how you perceive the world and your business, you hold on to them.
So you can have the nicest trucks, the nicest facilities in the world, the lowest cost of goods possible. But if you have bad people, you'll find a way to screw it all up.
Nobody walked across water. We're all human. We are going to make mistakes. Just acknowledging it and moving on is really one of the most important things. I know that it's difficult for people that have been here for a long time because we're trying to change it. We've been too generous, and now we're trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And it's really tough, but it's necessary.
Particularly necessary if you go through a year like 2022 when fuel prices shoot through the roof, because all of a sudden your cash drops considerably and your inventory and your error balances go through, and that can create a real big cash flow problem. So these things are protectionary. If you're doing them at a time when you have normal stable commodity prices, people might think that you're being a tough guy. But 3 months, one war, some geopolitical event on another part of the world can significantly hinder the company. It can wipe out your cash like that.
Every petroleum jobber seems to be made up with a little bit of different clay and mud and rock and glass. Yeah. We're not in the business of charging finance charges to make money. It's designed as an incentive for people to pay us on time.
So if, God forbid, somebody has a horrible accident or something catastrophic happens, what are some of the things that could benefit you in that situation if you do have, I would say, a mature safety culture? We talked about cameras, but policies, procedures, we've gone through training,
Mongoose method, I believe is the term. Like, what are some of those best practices for if you're in this business long enough, statistically something bad can happen. You know, our trucks drive over 2 million miles a year, and you know, you can do everything right and something catastrophic can happen. So if you find yourself in that situation, what are some of the things that you want to have working in your favor as far as like the due diligence that you did leading up to that event? Is it strictly having written policies, or is there more than that?
No, you got to make sure if you have written policies that they're actually being followed, because that is one of the first things that a plaintiff attorney is going to latch on to is like, you have this policy, but you never actually follow it. You know, you actually go against it quite frequently. I can see that from all your emails and your records and all that. So if you have a policy in place, you actually got to use it. It can't just be sitting.
Can't just have a drug policy and then they go, well, how many random drug tests have you had? And you go, zero. Yeah. But we have a policy for it. That doesn't fly.
No, it's not good enough. You got to, you know, have the receipts, you know, document everything, make sure that when something happens, you're actually responding to it per your policy. You know, you've got to make sure there's all the training out there, that it's available and actually given to the employees instead of just sitting there. Oh, we have this book they could have read, but you know,
we never enforced it. We didn't provide the training. Nobody put any resources or energy into it, but the policy exists.
The policy exists. You know, another favorite right now is the plaintiffs will look at just the CDL manual and they will try to make it sound like the driver needs to know it 100%. How do you not know this? They actually are only required to pass the test by 80%. So, you know, as long as they have a good working knowledge, it should be good enough. They shouldn't know it word for word. I think that would put a lot of pressure on a driver to think they would have to know that.
That's a giant memory exam.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That doesn't necessarily pertain to you being a safe and good driver.
Exactly. Or to even get the license to begin with. Like, there are standards. And so, yeah, if you have policies in place, got to follow them. I think that's one of the biggest things that they're going after right now when they're going for those nuclear verdicts is their safety culture is just an illusion, you know. Yeah. That's what they want to say. When we want to show, no, that's not true. We take it seriously. This is what we do.
It's a reality. It's enforced. It's embedded in our culture. Right. And unfortunately, this event happened. We're going to try to do right by it. But all the research that you're going to see shows that this is truly a safe culture. And we just had this incident occur and we'll handle it the best way possible.
Exactly. And then, you know, showing that there's continuous improvement, that when something happens, we react to it and then we reincorporate that into our policies. Because you're always learning. Something can happen that you never even thought of. Yeah. You're like, oh,
new problem.
New problem. I feel like we run into those every day. And so you want to make sure that, you know, you document that and you incorporate it and, you know, learn.
So if you're, you know, a larger company, you do have a mature safety culture, you know, and you're finding that insurance continues to go up, even though you get safer, it doesn't necessarily reflect in your premium. Do you have options, or are there other creative forms of insurance out there outside of the traditional model? I know we've explored captives, but maybe everybody isn't familiar with what a captive is. So could you generally explain what that is and the possible benefits that could come from it?
Oh, captive insurance is almost basically self-insurance. It's very similar to, you know, the big companies who don't even bother to get insurance policies because they have so much money they can just put it in a bank account and, you know, they're basically self-insured 100%. Captives they're group captives, so you're spreading the risk amongst a group of different companies, and you can do that, you know, with like companies or with companies that differ for you. It depends on your industry. I think the homogeneous ones are better for our industry. You can get a lot of, you know, feedback and learning from other companies who've had safety events and see how they handled it. And I think that is a really good component for risk management. But the captive insurance, it also could be a way where you're actually getting a return on your investment for your safety culture, because you're only spending the money on claims that have happened rather than on a premium that is going towards an insurance company.
Yeah.
So, and then
you use it regardless.
Right. You take that money, you put it in a fund, and it's earning interest. It's just sitting there, and after a few years, you know, they do distribution back to you. And as long as you've done what you say you do, you're making some money off of that rather than just paying out premiums constantly.
And you're with a highly vetted group that also is at probably a similar stage of maturity in their safety culture. So you're shared. If you pick the right captive, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for walking us through insurance. One of the common terms that consistently gets brought up is E-mod rating. What is it? Why should we be concerned with it?
Well, the E-mod rating is related to your workers' compensation policy, right? Yeah. Okay. And everybody thinks it's this huge mystery, and it kind of is convoluted because they're looking at a lot of different metrics to come with your E-mod rating. But before we get to that, what the E-mod rating does is it affects how much you're paying in premiums. Okay. So generally they look in an industry and they say, okay, this type of company is going to be paying $100,000 because that's what they should be paying based on their risk exposure for a workers' comp claim. But that's very general. Businesses are different. They have different safety cultures. And so in order to reward businesses that do well, you can get your E-mod rating. So generally you'll start with a 1. And if you have a 1, that's a 1.0, you're going to pay that $100,000 for the premium. If you have a 0.7, you're only paying 70%. If you have a 1.3, you're being penalized because you've gotten more workers' comp incidents than the average company in your industry. So when they're looking into determining what your E-mod rating is, they're looking over a course of 3 years, and they're looking at kind of your claims history. They're looking at the severity of your claims. So if you have like just one big claim, they'll look at that, see how much it is. Some states actually have a cap where they can only the insurance company can only consider up to $300,000. And so if you had a $600,000 claim, when they're looking at formulating your E-mod, they'll only consider up to the $300,000. Luckily, Nevada is one of those states. Arizona does as well, and so does Utah. And unfortunately, I don't think California does, but California is always a little different. That's why we have a separate workers' comp policy through them and a separate E-mod rating to California. So they're looking at severity, they're looking at frequency. So that's your little tiny claims, your sprained ankles, your twinged backs, all those things that just seem to happen, and you know, they're unfortunate. You try to adjust those through your safety culture, through health and wellness programs. You know, sometimes I really wish these guys would learn to stretch sometimes before they get their checks.
Yeah.
But so that's where you can address that to reduce that down. You can also have a triage partnership that can come in and help make sure that, you know, a teledoc, if an injury happens and it's not too bad, they can get the care that there and then and not have that lost time from having to go to an urgent care center, because that will go in because, you know, if there's disability payments that end up coming up because they miss multiple days and they file a workers' comp claim, it's going to go into that. They also look at your overall payroll. So they would know how much exposure there is. So if you have a really, really high payroll, the E-mod rating is going to affect how much you're paying. Luckily in Nevada, we cap that at $36,000
Per employee.
per year. So it helps keep workers' comp pretty reasonable around here. Nevada is actually one of the cheapest states to get a workers' compensation policy. The other thing that they look at is the classification code for your employees. So they look at, I believe most of our people are 8350s, and that's a fuel dealer classification. But you need to look at that list all the time, because sometimes they'll give someone an 8350, which means that they're looking at that person being a higher risk. And you could have them as a clerical because they're separated, and even though they're working out near the warehouse, they're not actually anywhere near anything. They're
not on a forklift. They're not on a truck.
They're partitioned there in an office. And so, you can give them the clerical thing where the risk ratio for them is far, far lower. I think the risk ratio for our 8350s is somewhere between 6 and 8, whereas for our clerical people, it's like 0.3. If you have remote employees, make sure you have them coded as remote, because then it's like 0.1.
Yeah.
It's little to nothing. Insurance carriers are also going back to the 36K cap in Nevada. A lot of them bungle it. I think every single year we get our renewal, they forget to cap our employees at 36K, and that is a huge increase in our premium. when they don't do that accordingly. So we're always fixing that. And then the final thing that they look at is the type of claim. And what I mean by type of claim is, are we paying out lost wages or are we paying out medical expenses? So if you just pay medical expenses and you have a excellent restricted duty, light duty policy in place where the people are continuing to work, they will actually give you a discount on how much you spent for the medical portion of the claim.
So it's not weighted as severe.
So it's not weighted as severe. So say there was a $10,000 medical claim, but the person continued to work through, so they didn't have to pay for the lost wages portion. They'll only consider $7,000. Not all states do that, but Nevada does. I believe Utah and Arizona do as well. I don't believe California does, but
Not surprising.
not surprising. But they're looking at all these little tiny components and they're coming up with your rating, and that's what is affecting your EMR rating. It's all actuary. There's a national, it's the NCII who comes up with what the industries are paying and all that stuff. But you can do certain things in your business to mitigate those things. And
That will result in a better rating.
right, exactly. And I think one of the biggest things that people don't realize is the not the return to duty, but the light duty, restricted duty. It is not just helping with your EMR rating, but it's also helping with the employees' well-being in general. People who are working and are socializing tend to actually heal faster than people that are not. So having them still integrated in the business, it's a good thing all around, not just for your premiums.
Got it. So all those things are factored in, which results in your rating. Fair to say, 1.0 is kind of your baseline metric. If you're below that, you're doing really well. If you're above that, you got to tighten things up because it can result in increased premiums amongst potentially even lost customer base.
Correct. Yes. And any company that goes into this and they're like, okay, I'm going to change this. I'm going to start doing more restricted light duty. I'm going to look at these numbers. I'm going to look at the severity and frequency of our claim and put all these safety programs in place. You have to realize that the EMR rating is a lagging indicator because they only look over 3 years. But not only that, they don't look at last year. They start the 3 years from before that. So give yourself a good 4 years putting these programs in place and
Progressively get better.
You will progressively get better as those years fall off. But you gotta be patient, and the rewards will be there eventually.
We've learned that. Yeah. If we're like, hey, we're implementing all these great things and, we see that it's working, but yeah, it takes years before you actually see the result of that 3-year average working in the right trajectory.
Correct. Yeah. For the EMR rating, it's every year we're waiting to see what is it this time, and it's finally paying off. So that's nice to see.
Well, I appreciate having your legal mind perspective walk through those things because not everybody understands it. A lot of it is complicated when it gets into the insurance world and what you can do, not only to protect your company, but if you're going to pay money, you want to get a good result on that money. You don't want to pay more than is necessary. And there are options out there if you adopt the appropriate safety culture and you make sure that it's not just smoke and mirrors, but it's actually part of your culture.
Right.
Now that you've been a part of the oil industry culture, not only growing up in it, going through a long tenure in law, what are some of the things that maybe were surprising about the industry and some of the things that you enjoy about working in the industry?
I don't think there's too many things that were surprising about the industry to me. But I think the things I've enjoyed is this company in general. One of the reasons I joined it is because it's a very family-oriented company, which is very, very important to me. Family-owned business. My dad's business, it wasn't family-owned, but it was employee-owned. And that was very rare for an engineering firm that every single employee there.
Was it an ESOP?
I don't know.
Employee Stock Ownership Program. There's a great book on that.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know
Okay.
as exactly because it's just what my father told me growing up.
It's rare. Super rare.
Especially for an engineering firm. So, you get that culture where everyone has, something in the game. I think that's one of the reasons that his company was so successful was having that with the employees. But similarly, having a family-owned company where you see that consistency with family, multiple generations, and then that culture where it's like we understand that family comes first sometimes, and that your job is not your life, and that there are other priorities out there. That's something that I really appreciate, and law firms aren't really known for. Yeah. I mean, that's in fact in between.
Fill those hours.
In between kids, I did consultant work where I got out of that, so I would be able to focus on my children for the first couple of years of their life. Because law firms don't allow you to do that. In fact, when I first found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I resigned from my job the next day because I knew I would not be able to do the job up to my standards. We were in day-to-day, every single day, depositions. I was billing 350 hours a month. And it was just like, reality is I've saved. It's okay. I can take some time, go through pregnancy with my daughter, take that time with my family. And then it's one of the times when I got all these opportunities to do type of law and draft motions for people as like a ghostwriter on things that I typically was not having the opportunity to do when I was just doing construction work. So that, opened up my horizons too, got me a lot more experience.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And if you're billing 350 hours a week, even though most of your hours probably made it into billable hours, you're actually working more than that.
Yes.
That's what makes it through to the actual invoice to the
Yes.
customer.
Yes.
Having worked in a law firm, obviously a lot of really smart people, but I would say that your attrition rate, particularly with women, and right around that time when they start having kids, is really high because, I have a wife. She's been through pregnancies. Luckily everything went well, but having to deal with that and the culture at a law firm, I don't know if that's great mentally, physically, spiritually.
No, being an attorney is hard enough. That's why they make us every year. We have to take 2 hours of, mental health and substance abuse continuing education courses. But everyone talks about, there's all these women going to law school. It's, no longer a male dominated industry. But the reality is that in practice, most women do drop out once they start having children. And if they do continue in it, it's a little side job consultancy, or they open their small little firm and they don't want to do that big firm life. Some of them can handle it. Some of them.
Yeah. It's up to the individual and what they want out of life, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody has their own priorities and what they want in life. And for me, one of the reasons I became a lawyer was not only because it was interesting and, what am I going to do with this degree in psychology, but I wanted to know that no matter what happened to my husband or my family, I would be able to support them on my own. I always wanted to be able to earn that money where if, tragically my husband passed or something happened where our marriage didn't work out, that, I wouldn't have to rely on him. I would be able to, my children would be the same lifestyle and we would be able to continue on as is. And that has always been one of my top priorities from being a lawyer as well.
Yeah, I would say having the capabilities to be self-dependent, autonomous, super important. And if you find yourself where you have to take a step back professionally because you're having kids or medical issues, just know that that knowledge is still there. And even if you don't go directly back into that industry, you can apply that knowledge horizontally to something else if it's the right time for you and the right circumstances. So for those ladies out there, if you don't stay in the law firm and you do want to re-enter the workforce, Marlis is a perfect example of how that can be a tremendous success story.
Yeah. I was my own workforce there for a while. I ran the offices from my office for a couple, Las Vegas offices for a couple very big regional law firms from my house. I think one of the reasons that I also looked into the job here was, COVID hit. And when I was doing consultancy work, the great thing was I would be at home, but then I'd be able to go to court. I would be able to go to a deposition and I would still be getting out there and seeing people every once in a while, right? Exactly, working. And COVID hit and all of a sudden all the depositions were video, everything.
Yeah, what was it, Bluefish, the app?
Yeah.
I was on a couple of those, yeah.
Blue Jeans.
Or Blue Jeans, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like, wow, what is the point? And at that point, I'd been talked out of leaving my consulting business and once again, being the Las Vegas or Nevada attorney for a regional firm. And it was just 6 months back into that firm life. And I was just like,
oh, this is why I left.
Yeah, this is why I left. Now I remember. The team that I was working with, they were all in California. They were all great attorneys. It was just working for a law firm it's just not not what I was looking for at that point in my life.
Yeah, it's a grind, no doubt about it. Necessary work, and kudos to anybody that does it, but it is a grind.
It is a grind. Yeah.
Well, let's end on something more happy. Both of us watched Landman.
Yes.
I think we both enjoyed the show, but what are your thoughts on the attorney, the female attorney that's in the show?
Well, I mean, I've never
Accurate, super accurate.
no, not accurate at all. And like I said, I think we've had this conversation before. I've had this conversation with my husband that I think when we were watching the episode, we actually paused it and we're like, did she just say that? But I've never heard of an attorney being called an expert in causation and liability. Like that's not really a practice area.
It's not a thing?
It's not a thing. Like we hire experts that are actual experts in causation or liability, accident reconstructionists, that type of person who actually testify to that matter in court and explain things for jury. That's not really the attorney's job. So, it's the typical theatrics that they put into TV shows to make lawyering sound, I guess, more interesting than it really is.
Understood. What do you think about the rest of the show?
The rest of the show is great. No,
Billy Bob?
Billy Bob. I've always been a big
Yeah.
Billy Bob fan. I think I told you this before. I think the title is inaccurate. Landman, that's the guy, that's his son who's going from, farm to farm trying to get the mineral and oil rights. He's more of a company man. He's the problem.
He was a landman.
Yeah.
He became a company man after he went bust. And now his son is, trying to be a landman, hustling mineral rights. But
Exactly. So I enjoy it. Like he's a problem solver. I'm like, I could be like Bobby. That sounds good. Yeah.
there is a lot of truth in that. Obviously it's made for television. So I think they embellish it or make the accidents that, unfortunately do happen in the industry far more frequent than they actually happen. I feel like, he gets like 3 catastrophic events a day. Like, geez, how's this company still around?
They'd be out of business. And I don't think there's as much with the cartel involved. They said hope not.
That was a hell of an opening scene. Yeah. And last episode, not going to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but good show. I'm glad to hear that it's coming back. Thank you very much for doing this. I think it was awesome to have you on here and get your perspective on things that are complicated and that fall into your territory in the company.
If you ever come up with any more topics you like to talk about,
Undoubtedly, we will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for doing this. Good score.